I learned that the year I let Marin go, I had stood in my own great hall with my counsel at my back and my mouth full of the wrong words, and she had listened, standing very still in the candlelight, her hands quiet at her sides, and when it was done she had bowed once, the way a woman bows when she has decided to be gracious about something unforgivable, and by the time the morning tide came in she was gone. That was 3 years ago. I am still counting tides. My name is Kadrin. I am the Alpha King of Vareth, which is a wolf kingdom built on coastal cliffs above a sea that smells of iron and old pine, and which I have governed since I was 24 years old with what everyone tells me is considerable skill. My council respects me. My pack fears me in the way packs fear a king who is also competent. My hall is full of people who want things from me, and I am good at the work of giving them the correct things and refusing the incorrect ones, and I have never in my life been as good at anything as I was at making the single worst mistake of it. I will tell you how it happened, because the shape of a mistake matters when you are trying to understand why a man spends 3 years riding up and down a coastline asking in fishing villages whether anyone has seen a woman with dark eyes and a way of standing as though the wind does not touch her. The mate bond came on me slowly, which is unusual. Most men in the histories describe it as a sudden event, a scent, a sound, a first glance across a crowded room, and then the wolf is awake and claiming. For me it was gradual, the way the tide is gradual. You are dry, and then your boots are wet, and you cannot tell exactly when the change happened. Marin was the daughter of a cliff-keeper from the northern settlement of Arundel Point, which my counsel would tell you is not a place of any political importance, and they would be correct, and I have spent a great deal of time since deciding how much I care about political importance. Her father kept the old Tidewatch Tower, maintained the signal fires, knew which rocks would gut a ship in fog. She had grown up on the edge of things, the edge of the kingdom, the edge of the sea, the edge of what my council considered worth considering. She came to the keep at Vareth Hall the winter I was 28, in the company of a trade delegation from the northern settlements, carrying a letter from the coastal wardens about storm damage to the cliff roads. She was not important. She was not meant to be anyone. I was in the lower courtyard when the delegation arrived, overseeing the resetting of a gate hinge that had been wrong for a month, and she came through the arch ahead of the others, because she had stopped to look at the way. The sea light hit the stone, and she stood there for a moment with her face lifted and her eyes half closed, and my wolf went absolutely still. Not alert. Not tense. Still, the way water goes still in a sheltered pool, the stillness that means something has settled, something has recognized, something has said there with a certainty that does not require argument. I did not say anything. I did not do anything. I finished overseeing the gate hinge, and I went inside, and I told myself the wolf was restless from 3 weeks of indoor council sessions, and the stillness meant nothing. By the end of the week, I knew I was lying. She stayed a fortnight, while the coastal warden's letter was reviewed and the storm damage assessed and the repair order written. I found reasons to be in the same rooms as the delegation. I am a king. I can always find reasons. I learned that she had trained as a healer in addition to her father's tide work. I learned that she spoke 3 of the old coastal dialects and could read the weather in the color of the horizon. I learned that she laughed rarely, and when she did it was at herself, and that she had no patience for flattery and considerable patience for difficult problems, and that she could silence a room not by being loud, but by being so precisely right that argument died in men's throats. My wolf did not go still again. It had found its stillness and settled into it, the way a wolf settles at a hearth, not sleeping, not tense, just present, just warm, just quietly certain of where it was. She came back the following spring, and the one after that. The coastal settlements had ongoing business with the hall, and she was her father's representative now. And I was finding that the 2 weeks of each year when the northern delegation visited were the weeks I was clearest in my head, The weeks my wolf was gentled and my sleep was easiest. The weeks I seemed to make the best decisions about everything. We did not speak of anything personal. We spoke about tide roads and storm season, and the fishing levy, and the old cliff signal system that needed updating. We spoke about nothing that would have meant anything to anyone listening, and every word of it meant everything to me. I knew what the bond was. I had known since the courtyard. I simply had not acted on it, because acting on it would have required saying things aloud, and saying things aloud makes them real and permanent. And there was a part of me, a smaller part than I am proud of, but a real one that found it easier to hold the bond quietly than to bring it into the open and risk it being complicated. My counsel had been pressing the question of my mate for 2 years. I want to be honest about this part, because the honest version is less flattering to me than the version where I am simply a victim of political circumstance. The truth is that my counsel pressed, and I let them press, and I did not say I have already found her, and she is standing in my great hall twice a year, and her name is Maren of Arundel Point. I did not say it because saying it would have required a kind of courage I was not yet ready to spend. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment for cowardice. I understand that now. The night everything ended, or rather, the night I ended it, though I would not have used that word then, the hall was full. There was a formal dinner for a visiting delegation from the Eastern Territories, and Maren was there with the Northern Coastal Party, and my counsel had arranged, without telling me they had arranged it, to have the announcement of my betrothal made during the feast. Her name was Sella. She was the daughter of the Eastern Lord, well-born, well-connected, politically useful in 3 different ways that my counsel had laid out for me in a document I had read and not objected to. I had not objected because I had been telling myself the bond was something I could manage, something I could set aside, something that did not require me to do the complicated and possibly disruptive thing of claiming it. I heard the announcement the way you hear something that you already know is coming, but have refused to believe until it arrives. I looked across the hall. Maren was standing near the far wall between 2 other members of the coastal delegation, holding a cup of wine she was not drinking. She had heard it. She was looking at me. The expression on her face was not the one I had dreaded. I had expected something that would force me to do something, anger, grief, something I would have to respond to. What she had instead was a kind of perfect composure, the composure of someone who has just learned the exact shape of a thing she had suspected and decided in the same moment of learning how she was going to carry it. Her eyes met mine for exactly as long as it took to say, "I see. I understand. I will not ask you for anything." Then she looked away. She bowed to the high table before she left the hall. Once. The bow was perfect, the correct depth, the correct angle, nothing excessive. It was the bow of a woman who had decided to be entirely gracious about something she did not have to be gracious about. I watched her go, and I did not stop her, and I will carry that particular failure for the rest of my life. By morning she was not in the hall. By noon the coastal delegation had packed and departed. By evening I had been informed by one of my stewards that the northern delegation had left before first light. My wolf went silent. Not restless, not grieving, not howling, not the theatrical response I might have expected, just silent. The warmth that had settled into it over 3 years simply withdrew, like a fire that has been properly banked and covered. Still there, perhaps, but giving no heat, making no sound, barely present. I sat in my hall that evening, and felt the absence like a room with all the furniture removed. The betrothal held for 4 months. I will not detail its dissolution at length, because it is not the most honorable part of this story, and Sella, who was a sensible and pragmatic woman, deserved better than what I gave her, which was the company of a man whose wolf had gone silent and who was clearly somewhere else in his head at all times. She came to me in the 3rd month and said, quietly and without drama, that she thought we both understood this was not going to become what it was meant to be, and she suggested, with considerable grace, that a formal and dignified end to the arrangement would serve everyone better than a formal and dignified misery. I agreed. I was grateful. I have sent her appropriate gifts every year since. The council was not pleased. I was not, at the time, capable of caring about the council. I sent a rider north to Arundel Point within the week of the dissolution. He came back 3 weeks later with the information that Marin of Arundel Point had left the settlement 8 months ago, shortly after the feast where the betrothal announcement was made, and that her father reported she had gone up the coast, further north, to a place called Whitecliff Reach, which was a small village of maybe 60 families, a healer's station, and a tide watch post. I sent another rider to Whitecliff Reach. He came back with a letter. The letter was from Marin, brief and polite, written in her usual precise hand. It said that she was well, that she had established herself as the resident healer at Whitecliff Reach, that the community had need of her skills, and that she wished the King of Vareth continued good governance and a peaceful reign. It did not say come and find me. It did not say I am still here. It said, and I have read it enough times to have it memorized, exactly what a woman says when she wants to give you a clear and generous door out of pursuing her, in case that is what you need. I did not take the door. The first year I sent riders, letters. I asked after her work, the settlement's needs, the condition of the tide watch post. She answered every letter with that same precise, courteous hand. She was well. The village was well. The post needed a new rope and pulley on the signal arm. She had treated 17 cases of the winter cough and lost none of them. She was learning the local dialect, which was different enough from Vareth's coast tongue to be interesting. She did not ask me to stop writing. She did not ask me to visit. She gave me, with perfect consistency, the exact amount of correspondence that a practical woman might maintain with the administrative center of her kingdom, and not one word more. My wolf remained silent. I governed, I held council. I resolved 3 border disputes and oversaw the construction of the new Stormsea walls along the southern cliff face, and adjudicated a complicated inheritance matter that had been festering for a decade. And I did all of it competently because I am, as I mentioned, good at the work, and I did all of it with a silence in my chest where the warmth used to be. The second year, I rode north myself. Not all the way to Whitecliff Reach. I told myself I had business in the Middle Coast settlements, which was true. I did have business there, and I told myself I was simply being thorough in my inspections. I got as far as Saltmere, which is perhaps 3 hours' ride from Whitecliff Reach, and I stopped at the edge of the settlement and stood on the cliff road in the sea wind for a long time, and then I turned south and went home. I was not ready. I did not know what I would say. I did not know how to say it without making it worse. The wolf in its silence made a sound that was not a sound, more like the ghost of pressure, the memory of warmth, a direction. North, it said or didn't say. I went home anyway. The third year, this past winter, this past spring, I stopped finding reasons to wait. I left Vareth Hall on a morning in early spring when the sea ice had just broken up and the cliff road north was passable again, with 2 of my personal guard and nobody else. My council knew I was making coastal inspections. This was not entirely untrue. I had been to every settlement between Vareth and the northern reaches so many times in the past 3 years that I knew the innkeepers by name and the innkeepers knew me, and none of them asked why the Alpha King of Vareth kept riding north and turning back. They are coastal people. They understand that some things take time. The road to Whitecliff Reach climbs away from the sea for the last 2 miles and then comes back over a headland and drops down into a village that is arranged, very practically, with its back to the cliff and its face to the sea. It is a small place. The 60 families, the healer's station, the old tide watch post on the highest point of the headland with its signal arm pointed at the horizon. The houses are stone, because everything on this coast is stone, and there are boats pulled up on the shingle and nets drying on frames, and the smell of salt and seaweed and wood smoke that is the smell of every village I had ever inspected. And I came over the headland road and saw all of it and felt the wolf, for the first time in 3 years, lift its head. Not speak, not stir loudly, just lift its head, like a dog that has been lying by the fire and has just caught from under the door the faintest thread of a scent it has been waiting for. I stopped my horse. The guard stopped behind me. They have learned over 3 years not to ask questions when I stop and look at the horizon. The village went about its morning work below us. Someone was mending a boat on the shingle. Someone was carrying a basket from the general store. A pair of older women were talking outside what looked like the healer's station, which was a low stone building with a green-painted door and a mortar and pestle symbol carved above the lintel. One of the women was not from here. Her stance was different, not the coastal slouch but something more upright, attentive, the posture of someone who has grown up watching horizons for weather and has never fully relaxed her shoulders. Her hair was dark, pinned at the neck. She was wearing a plain healer's coat over a gray dress, and she was listening to the older woman with the focused patience that I had always thought of as specifically hers, the patience of someone to whom listening is a skill and not a performance. The wolf did not go still this time. The wolf came alive. 3 years of silence and banked cold and waiting, and it came alive all at once, not howling, not dramatic, just suddenly there, suddenly warm, suddenly absolutely certain the way it had been certain in the courtyard in that first winter when she came through the gate and lifted her face to the light. The bond, which I had thought might have faded, which I had been afraid to test, blazed back so fully and so immediately that I had to put my hand on the saddle horn to stay balanced. There, said the wolf in that wordless way it had, there she is, we found her, finally. I left the guard at the top of the headland road and went down alone. I did not announce myself. I was not wearing my formal cloak or my chain, just the plain riding coat I wore for inspections, and on a gray spring morning in a small coastal village, I was just a man on a horse coming down the road, and no one gave me a second glance until I dismounted at the public trough and turned around and Maren was standing 20 feet away, watching me. She had seen me before I saw her. She had always been better at reading the horizon than I was. She was not afraid. She was not angry on the surface. Her expression was careful, the carefully composed face of a woman who had had 3 years to decide how she would feel about this moment, and had decided to feel it from behind a considered distance. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was the same. I had been afraid, without quite admitting it, that I might have misremembered it, and I had not. "Maren," I said. A long pause. The sound of the sea, the wind, the distant voices of the women who had been talking and had stopped. "You have come a long way," she said, "for a coastal inspection." "I am not here for a coastal inspection." "I know," she looked at me steadily. "What are you here for?" And here is where I will say something about Maren of Arundel Point that has always been one of the things I loved most and found most difficult about her. She does not make things easy. Not out of cruelty. She is not a cruel person. But she has no patience for evasion, and she will not hand a man the words he should be saying on his own behalf, and she will not pretend that a thing that happened did not happen in order to make the conversation more comfortable. She had asked me a direct question, and she intended to have a direct answer, and she would wait as long as it took to get one. "To say things I should have said 3 years ago," I said, "before the feast. Before all of it. Before you announced a betrothal to someone else." "Yes." "In front of your full hall." "Yes." "While I was standing in it." I held her gaze. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The older woman who had been talking to her had retreated, with the unobtrusive tact of a woman who has lived in a small village long enough to know when a private conversation has arrived. That is a very long list of specific things to acknowledge, Marin said finally, and her voice had something in it that was not quite dry and not quite sad and was very specifically hers. I know I wanted to be thorough. Something shifted in her face, not a smile, not yet, but the recognition of something. Why now? Because I have been riding north for 3 years and turning back, I said. I stopped turning back. She studied me. The wind came off the sea and moved her hair against her collar, and she looked at me the way she had always looked at things she was trying to understand completely, without hurry, without pretending to a certainty she didn't have. Come inside, she said at last. I have a patient to check on. You can wait or you can come with me. I don't particularly want to have this conversation in the street. The healer's station at Whitecliff Reach was a single long room with a curtained partition at one end, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a well-organized row of preparation shelves, and 2 chairs near the hearth that had clearly seen a great deal of use. The patient was an elderly fisherman with a winter cough that had nearly become something worse, and Marin checked his breathing and adjusted his treatment and spoke to him with the quiet specificity I had watched her use on every difficult problem, not reassuring in the vague way, but precise, naming what was improving and what still needed watching, treating him as a person capable of understanding the truth about his own condition. I sat in one of the hearth chairs and watched her work and felt the wolf lying quietly in my chest, warm now, just warm. The banked fire warmth returned. When the patient's wife had come to take him home and the station was empty, Marin washed her hands at the basin and dried them and came and sat in the second chair. She did not look at me immediately. She looked at the hearth. Tell me what you want to say, she said. I want to say that I made a mistake, I said. Not the mistake of the announcement, though that too. The mistake before it. The years of not saying. Of holding something that should have been said and not saying it, because saying it would have required me to do a difficult thing. She was quiet. I knew what the bond was, I said. From the first winter you came to Verith Hall, I knew what my wolf knew. I knew what I was feeling. I let my counsel press me toward a political arrangement because it was easier than being honest about something that would have disrupted their plans, and I told myself there would be time, and there was not, and I hurt you. You did, she said, not angry, just accurate. You were gracious about it, I said, more gracious than I deserved. I had no interest in causing a scene. Her voice was dry. I am not a scene-causing person. I know you're not. I looked at my hands. You walked away without asking me for anything, without making me feel the weight of what I'd done. You gave me every possible opportunity to just let it be, to not pursue this. Yes, she said. I couldn't, I said. She looked at me then. Really looked, the way she had in the courtyard all those years ago when I had first felt the wolf go still, completely, without performance. I'm aware, she said quietly. I've been getting your letters for 3 years. I'm not unaware that you haven't stopped. I stopped? Did it matter to you that I hadn't stopped? A long silence. The fire settled. The sea sound came through the thick stone walls as it always does on this coast, constant and present, the breathing of something very old. Yes, she said, it mattered. I will not tell you it was simple after that. It was not simple. She did not fall into my arms. She was not sitting in her healer's station having spent 3 years waiting to be rescued, because she does not need rescuing. She needed nothing from me. She had built a complete life here, a good one, a life where she was known and valued and doing work that mattered, and she was not going to abandon it for a king who had proven once that he would choose the path of least difficulty over the honest one. We talked for most of that day. We walked the cliff path above the village in the afternoon, where the sea was gray-green below, and the spring grass was coming in on the headland, and I told her the truth about everything, the cowardice of the not saying, the dissolution of the betrothal, the 3 years of riding north and turning back, the wolf's silence and what that silence had felt like, the moment on the headland road when the wolf had lifted its head and she had been standing at the green-painted door. She listened. She asked, at certain points, precise questions that required me to be more specific than I would naturally have been. She did not let me be vague where the truth was concrete. What I found was this: she had not stopped either. She had not been sitting here in anguish. She is too practical for anguish as a sustained state. But she had not, in 3 years, done what I half feared, which was to simply close the door entirely, to decide that the King of Vareth was a chapter that had closed and take the several other options that must have come her way. She hadn't. She had been here, doing her work, being honest with herself about why she had answered every letter rather than declining correspondence, about why she had not specifically asked me to stop. "The bond doesn't simply close," she said. We were standing at the edge of the headland, the sea below us catching the late afternoon light. "I know that. I've known it the whole time. I wasn't waiting for you. But I also wasn't concluding." "I'm here now," I said. She looked at the sea. "You are." "I would like to ask you," I said, "not to return with me tonight or tomorrow or because I've ridden up here and made a speech. I would like to ask you whether there is anything I can do, anything real, that would give you reason to consider it." She turned and looked at me, and I saw something change in her face, not melting, not surrender, but a kind of recognition. The recognition of a person who has been waiting, without admitting it, to be asked the right question. "You've already done it," she said. "You asked rather than assuming." She did not come south immediately. We agreed, she agreed, with the careful consideration of a woman who does not make any decision carelessly, that she would come in 2 weeks, after she had arranged a temporary healer to cover Whitecliff Reach's needs, after she had spoken to the families who relied on her, after she had done the things that a person who has built real obligations does before uprooting themselves. I went home and I waited, and I did not send a rider, and I did not check, and I trusted her the way I should have trusted her 3 years ago. She came on a morning in late spring, with one bag and her kit and her father's old compass hung at her neck, riding a decent enough horse she had bought from the settlement, and she came through my gate the way she had come through it the first time 8 years ago, with her face tipped up to the light, taking in the stone and the sea glare and the smell of the place. My wolf, which had been listening all morning, recognized her before I heard the gate open. I was in the courtyard. She saw me, and she stopped her horse, and we looked at each other across the distance the way you look at someone when you have said most of the important things, and what remains is just the fact of being in the same place. "You came," I said. "I said I would," she said. "I brought her before my council the following week. I want to be precise about this part, because it matters. I did not ask her to stand at my side while I explained the situation. I asked her in advance whether she wished to be present, and she said yes, and so she was there, standing at the high table in the clothes she had brought from the coast, which were plain and salt-washed and entirely herself. When I told my council that I had found my fated mate, that the bond had been present for 8 years, and I had failed to act on it when I should have, and that I intended to correct that failure. I told them her name. I told them she was the daughter of the cliff keeper of Arundel Point, which was, I was aware, not a politically significant origin, and that I had given the question of political significance exactly as much weight as it deserved, which was none at all. The council, to be fair to them, was more measured than I expected. There were 3 faces that went carefully blank. There were 2 that showed something that might, generously, be called relief, which told me they had noticed the wolf's silence even if they had not understood it. There was one, my oldest counselor, a man named Pet, who had served my father before me, who looked at Marin for a long moment, and then looked at me with the particular expression of an old man who has seen several young ones make complicated decisions, and has learned to reserve judgment until the decisions have had time to prove themselves. Marin, for her part, stood at the high table in her plain coast dress and her salt-washed composure and met every set of eyes without flinching, and said, when addressed directly, the precise and correct thing. And when the council had said what it had to say, she looked at me and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "Was that the difficult part?" "One of them," I said. She considered. "I think I can manage the rest." The bond settled over the weeks that followed, the way the wolf had settled in those early years, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, deeply, the way something comes to feel like it was always there. She learned the hall. She did not change herself for it. She learned it the way she learned a new patient's body, with attention and patience and the willingness to be methodical. She set up a healer's room in the East Wing, because the keep had never had a proper one. And within a month she had patients from 3 settlements coming to her. And within 2 months my own guard were going to her with their minor injuries, with a casualness that suggested they had forgotten she had not always been there. My wolf ran again that summer for the first time in 3 years. I went with it, out over the cliff fields at dawn, running the old coastal routes, and the wolf ran light and certain and warm, the way it had before, the way I had not let myself remember exactly. And when I came back to the hall in the morning, the hearth in the East Wing was lit, and I could smell the salt pine of her herbs, and the wolf settled back into its quiet, pleased place in my chest and stayed. Old Pet came to me in the 7th week and said, without preamble, that in his estimation the situation appeared to be resolving itself satisfactorily. I thanked him. "The North Coast healer," he said. "She's been here 7 weeks. "She has. She told Counselor Marrett," he said, "in the trade review session, that the storm sea wall construction on the southern cliff face had a structural assumption that wouldn't hold past a heavy winter, and she could show him the survey figures from the northern stations that would demonstrate it." "She's right about that," I said. "I know she's right," Pet said. "That's why I'm mentioning it." He gave me the old man look again. She told him kindly, not as a correction, as information she thought he'd want. "That sounds like her," I said. Pet was quiet for a moment. "You should have brought her here the first winter," he said. "I know," I said. "Well," he said, with the philosophical brevity of a man who has watched enough mistakes resolve themselves to know that dwelling on them is not the most efficient use of time, "here we are." The formal claiming was in late summer. I want to be honest again. I asked her specifically whether she wanted the formal ceremony and what form she wanted it to take. She thought about it for longer than I expected. She is not a person who pretends to feel things she does not feel, and the trappings of ceremony have never been her natural mode. And then she said that yes, she wanted it. Not for the spectacle, because she wanted it to be real. She wanted the record to be clear, not because she needed the hall's recognition, but because she had spent 8 years in a kind of peripheral relationship to this place and the people in it, and she would like to be, in the simplest terms, officially here. So we had the ceremony in the great hall, in the late August light that comes through the west-facing windows in long gold sheets, with the council present and the senior pack members. And because I had specifically arranged it, a delegation from the northern coastal settlements, including 2 women who had known Marin at Whitecliff Reach and her father's old deputy from Arundel Point. A gruff man named Collies who had known her since she was small, and who cried during the proceedings with a complete absence of embarrassment. She wore the dress she had chosen herself, which was a deep gray blue, the color of the sea on a clear cold morning, with no embellishment except the cliff-keeper's compass at her neck, which she had worn every day since arriving at the hall and which she would continue to wear every day after. She stood at the high table and her face was quiet, not the careful composure of the first day in the village, the composure that holds things in, open. The quiet of someone who has decided where they are and is content with the decision. I put the Luna's chain at her throat and she let me, and the wolf in my chest settled into the warmest it had ever been, warmer than the early years, warmer than the first courtyard. Still, because now there was nothing held back, nothing deferred, nothing sensible standing between what was true and what was said aloud. The council bowed, the old pet bowed, Collies from Arundel Point was still crying. Marin looked at me and I looked at her, and she said very quietly, "There, that's done." "That's done," I agreed. "I'd like to go look at the sea now." So we went. There is a path behind the hall that goes down from the cliff road to a ledge where the rock is flat and the view is clear in 3 directions, and where, on a good evening, you can hear the seals on the far rocks and smell the rain coming in from the west before it arrives. I had gone there in the silent years sometimes, when the wolf's absence was loudest. I had not gone there since she came back. We went that evening, in the long late summer light, and stood on the flat rock above the sea, and the wolf lay warm and easy in my chest, and the bond hummed between us like a rope pulled taut but not straining, the hum of something at the exact right tension, the hum of a thing well made that is doing exactly what it was made to do. "Did you always know," I asked her, "that I would come? That I wouldn't leave it?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the water. "I knew the bond was there," she said. "I knew it hadn't faded on my end. I assumed it hadn't on yours." She paused. I thought if you were ever going to do the harder thing, you would. And if you weren't, then you weren't, and I had built a life that was worth having, and I would go on having it." She looked at me. "I didn't know. I hoped." "I'm sorry it took 3 years," I said. She considered it. "You couldn't have gotten here sooner," she said. "You weren't ready sooner, and I wouldn't have wanted you half ready. I would have sent you home." I believed her. The sea moved below us, gray-green and old, catching the last of the light. The wolf was quiet in the warmest sense, the silence that is not absence but presence, the silence of something that has found its place and stopped looking. She reached out and took my hand, the way she does things, without announcement, without ceremony, just because the moment was the right moment. And we stood there in the sea wind until the light went, and then we went back inside. The bond does not forgive you for the time you wasted, but it does not hold it against you either. It is simply there, the way the sea is simply there, old and constant and requiring nothing, having been right all along. It had always been right. I just needed 3 years to believe it.